My first guest this week is Ward Connerly. He is the founder of the American Civil Rights Institute and a true advocate for equality over equity, and is best known for his tireless work in ending racial preferences in California, amongst other states. I invited him on to talk about that and what has been going on across the country in this fight for equity. Here's the first segment of our interview. Ward, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be with you, Charles.
I want to get into your efforts in your fight in the past against racial preferences and what we see on the horizon now and hear your views on it. But I want to start off with your background, where you grew up and how you ended up in California. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I was born in 1939 in Leesville, Louisiana, the Deep South. My father was not an exemplar of fatherhood. He left the household when I was 2. My mother died when I was 4. Some say that his brutality had played a role in the brain aneurysm that she had, which caused her demise. He died years ago, 55 years after I last saw him. Despite being orphaned, I was lucky to have fallen into the mentorship of a maternal grandmother and an uncle by marriage, and my mother's sister, Aunt Bert. That triumvirate formed the committee that raised me, and that was a blessing. We left the South in 1944, headed to the Northwest state of Washington. My Uncle James went to work at a naval shipyard there. He worked there for about a year or so, and then came to California, where he went to work at a lumber yard piling lumber and then digging ditches for a construction firm. James Lewis never went a day, as far as I can recall, of not drawing a paycheck. And he always said to me that to be a Maine, M-A-N-E, you take care of your family, you give the man a day's work for a day's pay, you treat other people the way you want to be treated. And because of that ethic, I grew up believing in what we call the American creed. And that is to say that we are individuals who have a certain God-given ability, and it is up to us to do what we can to maximize that ability.
That's an important point. I wanted to start there for that very reason. It's a powerful story. And it's sad that we need to prove our credibility or our understanding of certain things, but it's the nature of where we are. So when you talk about equality and you talk about America and liberty and all these types of things, people want to know where you come from first. They want to know what gives you the right to say that this is the case or it isn't the case, even though much of it is common sense. Or they'll say, well, yeah, of course you think that the country is not inherently racist because you've never suffered. You never went through everything. You get that easy life. You got white privilege. So that's why I wanted to talk about both the age, being from the South, understanding what racism is like, but at the same time, taking what you learned from your uncle and others and taking those values and that foundation, applying it, and lo and behold, you turned out pretty okay, I guess, right? I don't think that you spent most of your adult life flailing with no purpose or not being able to get a job or succeed or raise your family because of this overwhelming shadow of racism. So talk a bit about some of the things that you did that led you to pushing back against what people thought at the time was necessary in order to allow us to have equality.
Well, you have captured very well the policy and environment that I see and which has confronted me. The presumption that I too am privileged. You serve on the Board of Regents of the University of California. You are presumed to be part of the establishment, and therefore you don't see the failings of our society because you don't have to live with them. That is the presumption. When I graduated from high school, I had to borrow the $35 to buy the books that I would need. I went to a community college, not to a University of California or any select institution, but to a community college for 2 years. Thereupon graduating and going to Sacramento State College for 3 years. And it was that academic setting which taught me that it really doesn't matter where you go to college. What is important is that you go and that you fill your skull with as much knowledge as you possibly can to enable you to be a productive person. And if you do that and you take people as they are, you're going to be all right. Now, take people as they are. Yes, we do have racism, not always white against black. It can be light-skinned blacks against darker-skinned blacks. It can be black people against Chinese people. The human condition is such that we still have a difficult time negotiating our lives with people who don't look like us. That is a reality that we have to face. And I believe that we're better off acknowledging that reality and learning how to deal with difference. I won't call it diversity because I think that's a code word which really doesn't mean what it says, but difference, and trying to understand that difference is not inherently bad. Difference in all its dimensions is a reality that we need to learn to accept and not just tolerate, but to accept. And with that perspective, I've come to live my life trying to avoid identity, trying to avoid putting people into little boxes and treating them accordingly. I am a black man. I've lived in a world in which I am the, quote, minority, a term that I do not like, but I use it to give you some perspective about my understanding of my society. When we start herding ourselves into these artificial groupings based on skin color, based on how many vowels we have in our last name, I believe we betray what the good Lord intended in creating us as human beings. There's no conveyor belt that God uses to distribute his creation. We're all just beings, humans as we are, differences. And out of 340 million of us, I doubt that there are more than 3 or 4 of us that are identical, really identical. And in California, black people are about 6% of the population. American-born black people reduce our numbers to even less. Therefore, it is a matter of personal self-interest. I believe that I learn how and negotiate my life on the basis of not accepting these artificial human subdivisions that our society tries to create and to impose on us.
Coming up, more with Ward Connerly, founder of the American Civil Rights Institute. You are listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Ward Connerly, founder of the American Civil Rights Institute. And in the last segment, he was telling me about his upbringing, his childhood, how he got where he was, and what his foundation was. And here he continues that, and I ask him what made him start fighting against racial set-asides and promoting actual equality. Here is the next segment of our interview. You understood at some point that regardless of what other people believed or thought about blacks, you could carve out your space in the world. And so you were going along doing your thing. And at some point you saw this affirmative action thing. And whatever the intent was, you noticed that it was not what they intended. And it was antithetical to what you believed. So tell us what made you push back so hard against it, and then the avenues you took. It was obviously a long fight that you had to go put up against this force in the government to try to correct human behavior, which it can't do, through picking and giving certain types of people preference.
In about 1963, I'll go back even before that. In 62, I was ending my experience as a student at Sac State. The world in which I operated was one in which I was the student body president of about 3,500 students at that time. 50 of us were black students. So I was clearly one of few in that group. I called it the Melanin Caucus. And I learned that as long as I was secure in my being, and that if I did not close the doors of how I viewed people, I would be all right. I met a young woman, white. We fell in love, and I took her home to meet my grandmother. Mom was, I called her Mom because she was, in fact, the person that I regarded as my mom. She was half Irish and half Native American. But she said to me, Charles, something that I will never forget. And she said, after she had met my fiance, why couldn't you find a nice colored girl? And I didn't see her for several months after that because I was angered by it. It represented all that she had told me not to be, and that was to judge people on the basis of their color. And that experience put me on a path of really re-examining or thinking about the kind of person I wanted to be and the decisions I would make in my life. I married that young woman and began an experience that was often very difficult because interracial marriage at the time was not accepted, wasn't even legal in some respects. But that started me down a path of dealing with the issue of race in a very, very personal way, and making decisions that were not only visceral decisions, but intellectual decisions about life, about race, not in an abstract way, but in a real way. Coming out of Jim Crow, we had the decision to make as a country of whether race was going to be an important factor, or, as President John F. Kennedy said in 1963, obviously before his assassination, he said, race has no place in American life or law. That stayed with me. And he signed the executive order that wanted affirmative action to be undertaken to ensure that there would be no discrimination against the Negro. After his demise, Dr. King went to his successor, to Kennedy's successor, and he said, Mr. President, that executive order is not going to be enough. We have been so oppressed for all these years. It's not enough for us to simply be told that you won't discriminate against us. We need more than that. And so LBJ signed an executive order that created Affirmative Action 2.0. It was understood that this was simply going to bring the Negro up to the starting line and give us the ability to run the race, to compete on our own. But that we needed some help to get to the starting line, after which we would compete favorably on our own. Malcolm X at the time did not agree with Dr. King. He felt that we were becoming reliant on the white man, and that in the fullness of time we would be betrayed by the white man. And it would be important for us to stand on our own 2 feet, develop strong families, start our own businesses. I disagreed with Malcolm X's approach. I was a King supporter, still am. But there was a lesson in what Malcolm had to say, and we did not understand that message, that lesson. It wasn't that we had to have one or the other. We could have both, but we did not pursue both. Mm-hmm. We allowed affirmative action to guide our path, and to believe that race preferences, which is what affirmative action became, race preferences became the totality of our world, from which we never graduated. We remained enslaved to affirmative action.
I want to say something there, though, because I think you make an important point. It's one that I try to point out on a regular basis. As time changes and different things get added to the mix, the fix changes. But I've always said that during Reconstruction, And at that period, obviously, we're having these talks now about reparations. 100% agreed with reparations at the time. These people were slaves and treated as property. It was vile. It lasted for a long period of time. These people were still there and alive and trying to find a way to live their life in the country. That would have been a perfect time. It didn't happen. Then we went through Jim Crow. So I would even say, okay, then to say, I get the point of both. I lean more Malcolm, but I wasn't there, so it's not fair. It's a different time. I'm being like a backseat driver. But I will say that if for the affirmative action would have worked if they didn't do reparations, if they sunsetted it, saying it's by this time, and they were real specific about the way they did it. Coming up, more with Ward Connerly, founder of the American Civil Rights Institute. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
No, nothing else matters.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Ward Connerly, founder of the American Civil Rights Institute. We have been building up to this fight that he won in pushing back against racial preferences. Here he talks about why it was so important. And he points out how working from a premise that certain people simply cannot perform at the same level as others is on its face racist and something that needs to be rooted out. When you started fighting against affirmative action in the 80s, that is not what affirmative action had morphed into. It went from what Kennedy tried to LBJ talking to King saying we need a little more strength behind it, to the Philadelphia plan of Nixon. So it kept growing. And by the time it was in the 80s, let's talk about what it was there and why you made such an important effort to push back against it.
By the 80s, my people, in quotes, had demonstrated that we didn't need a crutch. We didn't need anyone to help us get to the starting line. We were at the starting line. We could run the race very well, thank you. And to give us that crutch did two things. One, it made us think that we needed it. And two, it made the rest of society think that we needed it. And we became branded as less than, incapable of doing it on our own. And that became a crutch in and of itself that has severely hampered the ability of our young people to go out into the world confident. You know, I was very active as an athlete, and I learned that a good athlete has to have a lot of self-confidence. I am the greatest. You have to believe that. And in the area in which Black people have excelled throughout my life, we have done so because of that empowering view that we are the greatest in whatever field we're operating in. That attitude has to be carried from athletics to academics, to whatever it is. And you cannot do that if you self-impose restrictions on yourself based on skin color. So when I got involved in the discussion about affirmative action as a UC regent, I brought with me that personal background of the debilitating effect of the mindset about skin color and how I thought that we needed to erase that from the identity of people who are branded as such on the basis of affirmative action.
You basically were like the father of the fight against these racial preferences, and you were able to get a proposition on the ballot in California and win. So talk about what that was like. And then you went on to do it in several other states.
The language of the initiative Proposition 209 that I implemented into the California Constitution and elsewhere is instructive. 37 words, simple, direct, quote, "The state shall not discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the operation of public employment, public education, or public contracting." If you parse those words, Charles, you clearly come up with an expression of equal treatment for every person. And you only reject that language, that view, if you believe that people are incapable of competing. If you believe that there resides within all of us the ability to compete absent discrimination on the basis of our identity, the only exemption from that language would be someone who is affected by a wheelchair or crutches, someone who cannot compete because of their physical limitations. In 1996, I was absolutely convinced that the Negro, the white, the Latino, the Asian were all capable of competing in our society as long as we continued the march to get rid of discrimination. We're all capable of competing. And that the society in which we would best be served would be one in which there would be no racial preferences. Everybody would be treated as an equal, and I felt that that would be best for our society. And so I embarked on that path of devoting my life to do what I could to create that society for America.
Coming up, more with Ward Connerly, founder of the American Civil Rights Institute. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am talking with Ward Connerly, founder of the American Civil Rights Institute, about racial preferences, equality, and equity. He's won a huge fight in California and other states, but now things are different, and so we talk about what's going on today. How many states did you get this passed in?
9. About 27% of the American people reside in a state which is free of what I call race preferences.
For now.
As I look at what is happening now with what we call critical race theory, the wisdom of what we embarked upon back in 1996 is being manifested because we are going down the wrong path.
Exactly. It's like, that's why when you said that, I said, for now, 27% live in that. If we don't fight, it may change. And I want to start talking about what we're facing now. And you even had to go back up against it again. I recently wrote an article for City Journal back in March, and I basically talked about the progressives and civil rights. And my call out was just to get them to be honest. Just admit it. You hate the Civil Rights Act now. You've been celebrating it every year. Every time we do an anniversary, you're like, hey, it's the anniversary of this, and you do the wave. And in it, I wrote, talking about what they say they want, I say the two concepts are contradictory. Careful examination of progressive demands juxtaposed with the language of the Civil Rights Act leads to the conclusion that those demanding equity, which is the new word that they want to use, should demand the law's repudiation. And my point is, they say they want equality, they used to, and now they say equity. But let's just look at their actions. In the article, I talk about how schools, and you know this so well because you fought, for the letter of the law. like in New York, de Blasio says he's going to break up the way they admit students to the selective enrollment schools, because right now it was based on your academic rigor, your attendance, and things of that nature. No. There are too many Asians and not enough Black and brown people. So we need to scrap that and find some other way to let them in. And the law, as I say in the article, literally the word of the law says that you cannot use race as a way to distribute the children in the school, but they're doing it, and they do it on every facet. So we're seeing them go away from all the work you've been fighting for, and it's going to have a detrimental end to it. And as we get into that, let's start off by saying we celebrated what you did and how you accomplished that in 9 states. But recently, you had to come out of retirement and put the Superman outfit back on and beat it back, because in California, they had a proposition that would basically take the teeth out of 209, right?
That's right, Prop 16. And none of their efforts, and I don't get into ad hominem against anyone, but none of their efforts were based on moral principles, or there was a decision made somewhere along the line that this was the right way to go. It was based on politics. And what was happening is that a new majority had taken over in California, primarily of Mexican descent, and power was driving the effort. Raw power. We are 40% of the population. The caucus, Latino caucus, was arguing, and as 40% of the population, we should have 40% of yada, yada, yada. And it seemed to me that this proportional representation represented a demise not only of the order which I had envisioned back in 96, but as you play out that scenario, a demographic that is part of the 6%, you better forget any idea that you will ever be governor or secretary of state or anything else, because you're not part of that majority, that new majority. Your future is carved out on the basis of your 6% identity. That's not the kind of world that we want. That's not equal opportunity. You know, when you look at what the founders must have been looking at back in 1770 something, not 76, because they had to start thinking about all of this before that. Mm-hmm. They must have sat around the table smoking a stogie, wondering, how do we create a structure that will allow people to fulfill the best of their lives? So what did they do? They relied on the Creator. They came up with liberty. They came up with equality, equal citizenship, and they came up with capitalism. Allow people to compete for everything. Everything is up for grabs if you want to go for it. Equal opportunity. And Charles, when I graduated from college, I looked and I was looking for jobs. I looked at the bottom of every job announcement and I looked for the words, "We are an equal opportunity employer." That gave me the confidence that if I applied, at least they knew about the importance of giving me a chance, and that my skin color would not impair my ability to compete for a job. Equal opportunity is important to people.
Coming up, my final segment with Ward Connerly, founder of the American Civil Rights Institute. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
You like me and I like you.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
This is our final segment with Ward Connerly, founder of the American Civil Rights Institute. And here he gives us a grim but honest view of what's going on today, why it's a problem, what true conservatism is, and the downside of change for the sake of change.
I believe that we have reached the critical point in our nation. We often hear about conservative versus liberal and on and on. It's the nature of progressivism to want change. The irony is that progressivism can be very regressive. It's change often for the sake of change. I have become far more conservative in my life because I have learned that there is a certain structure that is best for my great-grandkid, and I don't want change from that. The basic change has proven itself for 80% of the people. I don't want to change that. I want to go back and help the other 20%, but I'm not going to throw out the whole system for the sake of the 20%. So I want to conserve the system. Progressives want to change, and they don't know where that change is going to ultimately end up. And that frightens me, and that's where we are right now. We don't know where it's going to go. Give us the 6%. That's the field in which I'm expected to operate. I'm limited by the parameters of that 6%. And we haven't thought through, where does that lead us? If we had the mindset that we have right now, there might never be a Barack Obama. There might not be a lot of other people in venues where their 6% is not going to allow them to compete. The same applies for people of Chinese descent who are Americans. It applies to Latinos. They will be limited in other venues as well. And yet we don't have the courage as a nation to acknowledge that we're living a lie. We have the Civil Rights Act. We have the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. We have laws coming out the gazoom saying we don't discriminate against people. We should not. If you put a law before the Congress right now that says we will not discriminate, I don't think you could get it out of a committee of any house of the Congress. Think about that. It's not a committee of any house, of any committee of the Congress.
Because all we do is discriminate now.
Yeah, we're living a national lie, and we don't have the courage to change the laws because we know that that would not be the right thing to do. We know it. We have my professor used to call it a knower, K-N-O-W-E-R. Our knower says that discrimination on the basis of these factors is wrong. But we don't have the courage to acknowledge that we're living a lie.
Wow, I guess we have to leave it there. I hope that something wakes people up, that pendulum reaches its apex and we swing back, but it is going to get worse before it gets better. He is Ward Connerly, a true civil rights advocate and fighter for equality over equity like people are pushing for now. You've done some tremendous work and definitely appreciate you, and thank you for your time.
Charles, thank you for the opportunity. God bless you.
You too.
Thanks.